Matt had never been the kind of guy who planned his words carefully. He was the sort of person who let things slip, figuring he'd deal with the consequences later. But this time, his off-the-cuff response had landed him in a mess that felt impossible to untangle. It all started at a party about 4 months ago. Matt wasn't really a party person, he preferred quiet nights in, but his best friend, Dylan, had dragged him along, claiming it was time for Matt to get out there and meet people. Reluctantly, Matt agreed, but halfway through the night, he found himself in a corner, awkwardly nursing a soda and scrolling on his phone. That's when they walked in. Sophie was effortlessly charismatic. She radiated confidence, and Matt was immediately drawn to her. Somehow, they ended up talking, and for the first time all night, Matt actually felt relaxed. That was, until she asked the dreaded question, "So, what do you do for work?" Matt froze. He worked retail at a clothing store in the mall, not exactly glamorous. His job paid the bills, but it wasn't the kind of thing you'd brag about to someone as impressive as Sophie. Panicking, he blurted out, "I'm a graphic designer." Sophie's eyes lit up with interest. "No way. That's so cool. What kind of projects do you work on?" Matt stammered out something vague about branding projects and logo designs, hoping the conversation would move on. To his relief, it did, but not before Sophie mentioned how much she admired creative people. Later that night, Matt replayed the conversation in his head. He felt a mix of pride and dread. On one hand, he had impressed Sophie. On the other hand, he had lied. At first, he figured it wasn't a big deal. It had just been a passing comment at a party. But then Sophie texted him the next day, and before long, they were hanging out regularly. Every time they met, she would ask about his work. "How's that branding project going?" or "Have you ever worked on an app design?" Matt didn't want to ruin things by admitting the truth, so he doubled down. He started researching graphic design terms, watching YouTube tutorials, and scrolling through Pinterest for inspiration. He'd send Sophie vague updates like, "Just wrapped up a client's logo, super excited about how it turned out," or "Busy day, working on a rebranding package for a small business." But things didn't stop there. Sophie, impressed by his supposed talent, started talking about recommending him to her friends. One day, she even asked to see his portfolio. Matt panicked. He couldn't admit he didn't have one, so he cobbled together a fake portfolio by downloading images from Pinterest. He sent her the link, hoping she wouldn't look too closely. To his horror, she loved it. "This is amazing, Matt. My friend owns a cafe and has been looking for a graphic designer. I'm going to show her your work," she said, beaming. Matt smiled weakly, his stomach churning. What had he gotten himself into? The lie began to spiral out of control. Matt found himself spending hours researching graphic design jargon just to keep up the facade. He started avoiding Sophie's texts, afraid of what new complication might arise. But the more he pulled back, the more Sophie tried to involve him in her world. One day, she invited him to a networking event for creatives. "You'll love it. It's all graphic designers, photographers, and artists. You can talk shop with them," she said excitedly. Matt knew he couldn't go. He'd be exposed in minutes. But how could he back out without raising suspicion? The weight of the lie was crushing him. He barely slept, constantly worrying about being found out. His retail job felt like a cruel reminder of the truth he was hiding. Every time he folded clothes or helped a customer, he imagined Sophie finding out and looking at him with disappointment or worse, disgust. Matt knew he had to come clean, but the thought terrified him. Would Sophie understand, or would she walk away for good? And what about her friends who thought he was a talented designer? How could he face them? The night before the event, Matt sat in his apartment, staring at his fake portfolio on his laptop. His heart was pounding. He knew he couldn't keep this up any longer. If he didn't come clean now, he'd only dig himself deeper into the hole. But the thought of losing Sophie was unbearable. He invited her over, his hands shaking as he typed the text. When she arrived, she was all smiles, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Sophie, I need to tell you something," Matt began, his voice trembling. "I haven't been honest with you." She frowned, sitting down on the couch. "What do you mean?" Matt took a deep breath and told her everything: the retail job, the fake portfolio, the lie he told at the party. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to seem boring or unimpressive. I didn't want to lose you. There was a long silence. Sophie looked down at her hands, her expression unreadable. Matt felt like his heart was going to burst. Finally, she spoke. Matt. I don't care what you do for a living. I liked you because you were funny and kind, not because of your job. But lying? That's hard to overlook. Her words stung, but Matt nodded. I understand. I just wanted you to know the truth. Sophie decided to take some space to process everything. Matt didn't blame her, he knew he had broken her trust. In the weeks that followed, he started to reevaluate his life. He realized that his insecurities had driven him to lie, and he resolved to work on himself. He started taking online courses in graphic design not to keep the lie alive, but because he genuinely found it interesting. Slowly, he began to build a real portfolio of his own work. As for Sophie, they eventually reconnected. Their relationship was different, less romantic, more tentative, but they found a way to rebuild their friendship. Sophie respected the effort Matt was making to grow, and Matt learned the importance of being honest, even when it's scary. In the end, the lie that had spiraled out of control became a turning point in Matt's life. It forced him to confront his fears and take control of his future. And while things didn't turn out the way he had initially hoped, he was finally living his truth.